What stories live in the land beneath our buildings, and how can we start to listen? Welcome to Net Podsitive, where we help you to transform your eco-anxiety into action through regeneration and resilience. I'm Richard Garrett, and today our guest is Justin Wolfe, a writer, editor, and content strategist working at the intersection of storytelling and the built environment. Justin partners with architecture, engineering, and construction firms, as well as art institutions and nonprofits to help them communicate clearly and meaningfully. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you, Richard.
Justin is the author of 2 books published by Ecotone in collaboration with the International Living Future Institute. Healing Ground, Living Values, about the Stanley Center for Peace and Security's Regenerative headquarters in Iowa, and The House Up on the Hill, which chronicles the revolutionary HMTX Industries headquarters. Justin also contributes to publications like Green Building Advisor, where he covers the design stories behind sustainable buildings. Today in our conversation, we'll talk about the power of storytelling, the significance of place, and how intersectionality can help build a more regenerative world. Boy, these are some deep topics to get into here, Justin.
They are a lot to dig into, yes.
Hey, so I'd love to learn a little more about you and your pathway. Tell me about how you ended up writing these amazing stories for the architecture, design, engineering community.
Well, it's a circuitous path, my professional story. It was definitely not a straight line from training to writing. I have a background in journalism and in history. I was an educator for many years. I tried my hand in my late 20s and early 30s as an independent journalist. I struck out in that moment, so I found my way into corporate communications, working in the art world, working in the design world. But always kept writing, more for just personal fulfillment, and maintained a small community of close friends and writers through various affiliations. And I was always quietly threatening myself that I was going to quit it all and go back to writing full time. I did not know what that looked like. And for better or for worse, COVID forced my hand. I was working in another corporate comms job, living in the Midwest with my family. I was laid off during COVID and went back to writing. We were all in isolation, and writing, other than my family, other than my children, writing has always been one of those things that centers me and keeps me sane. And eventually enough of that work accumulated and snowballed, and I called in enough favors from editors and other writers and people in the industry that I knew. And I called on them not to ask for not for money, just to ask for the opportunity to publish again.
Oh, okay.
And for my work to see the light of day and to have some eyeballs on it. Perhaps one day gain an audience and really hone my craft again. And I did that enough, and this is just 5 years ago. And then started making more connections with more editors and broadening that universe, and writing not exclusively in the design space, but also in the sustainable and regenerative design space. I started covering more in the energy policy space when the Inflation Reduction Act and the Biden administration climate initiatives really started to gain steam, and a lot of that legislation passed. There was all of a sudden these watershed moments. There was a lot of clarity. You can easily make the case that there were many road bumps along the way, and they were not implemented the way they should have been, or there was too much red tape or what have you. But everything packaged in that legislation really was a great moment for people in the green building movement and the climate movement to say, finally, there is action being waged at the state level, at the federal level. There is money being poured into innovation, into manufacturing, into rebuilding and revitalizing so much that we've been talking about over the last 20, 30 years. So much of that was coming to fruition. And to be a working journalist during that time was a pleasure. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. And now the script has been completely flipped. And I find myself, not just myself, but but others operating in the space, we find ourselves reporting on the dismantling of all of that infrastructure, of all of that progress, of all of that collective action, and not just grants being pulled or reneged on, but the dismantling of programs like Energy Star or grant programs through FEMA, through the EPA, through the Department of Energy, the Treasury. Or we can no longer rely on these institutions to guide and help fund private enterprise. Now, private enterprise is on its own and also has a target on its back. The legality of that is obviously up for debate, but operating in that space, it's somewhat terrifying, but it also, I think, reinforces the need to tell those stories, to report on facts, but also to lend it perspective, and not just report black and white facts, but also to lend clarity and context to what is happening, and really try to take a holistic view of the impacts of this action and inaction.
Well, you're not kidding. That is quite a career arc that you've been through, and a personal journey, personal and professional journey.
Yeah. Yes. And I started my first year coaching Little League, right? That's weighing heavily on me as well.
Hey, well, I want to build on that point, and I want to actually rewind just a little bit. You've said something here about striking out, speaking of Little League. So tell me about that experience of feeling strikeout. Tell me about laying in bed awake at night, wondering what's next. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was certainly a familiar feeling at the time. Beginning my career in education as an educator, teaching high school level history and science, and briefly at the middle school level, and worked briefly in the juvenile justice program in Boston, and was also an educator in New York City. And I realized that was not the career for me, because I saw through my colleagues and friends, also educators themselves, that you could just sense the fire in their belly, the enthusiasm, the excitement that they felt getting out of bed in the morning and going to work and having a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G in their pocket, ready to go. They had honed their skills, their craft. This is their trade. This is their joy. Not always their joy, but it is their craft there, and
Or calling.
a better word. And I did not have that. I felt no empathy when I saw that. And instead I was dreading one day to the next. And I thought, this is not for me. It is not my calling. And I didn't know what it was. I knew where my inclinations were. I knew what I loved, what I didn't. Writing was always that passion, but I never thought of it as a career path.
Oh, yeah?
I always, at least in my youth, into my 20s, I never considered it an option. But then I went back to grad school. I got a master's in liberal studies, which I affectionately refer to as my master's in undecided.
TBD.
And I've actually made that joke to others who have the same master's degree, and they maybe didn't appreciate the humor as much. But it was a wonderful experience. It was at the New School for Social Research in New York. Made some wonderful connections there with faculty and fellow students. Also, sort of people mid-career professionals in their late 20s and early 30s at the time, having their own version of an existential professional crisis. Where I'm pivoting. I'm taking
Quarter-life crisis.
I'm pivot here, and I don't know where it goes. And then from emerging from there and earning my master's, I started freelance writing for a variety of publications. One of my favorite professors was an art critic, Jed Pearl, I took 2 of his courses, and he's written several books, art historian and author, and was art critic for the New Republic for a long time. And he had a profound impression on me, and I started writing a lot of art criticism and art history, and I got involved with a few startups at the time, and was writing for a few online publications, reviewing gallery and museum shows, and getting paid not rather handsomely for the privilege, but enjoying the ride nonetheless.
Some amazing art.
Yeah, it's some amazing art, and these were wonderful years and wonderful experiences, but also not very lucrative experiences. And I could have kept going a little bit longer. I could have stretched it out, but it's also New York City, and everyone is hustling in their own way. But I didn't see a way forward at the time. So I thought, I need to hit pause on this or stop altogether. That's when, through various connections, landed me in working with a boutique PR agency that handled art world clients and also a few design clients. And that's what initially put me on the path of working in the design world, in corporate communications and consulting and marketing and so forth.
You mentioned here that some of your education colleagues had that fire in the belly. In journalism, did you find that passion within you, and how have you fanned those flames?
Having a thirst for knowledge and just a curiosity that never goes away. But also the subject matter is a passion of mine. So I attribute that to another former colleague of mine when I was working in the New York office of Perkins Eastman, a global design firm, and I had been there a few years when they hired Lance Hosey as their first chief sustainability officer. And his reputation preceded him at that time. He had co-authored a very well-received book, Women in Green, with Kira Gold. When I met Lance, and he was really, in retrospect, passing through. I don't think that was his intent at the time, but he was with that firm for maybe a year and a half, and then he moved from DC and went out west and took a job with a different firm. But my interactions with him, I was immediately drawn to him. He was a magnetic personality, but also when he really he clarified the impact of sustainable design, the idea that high design does not mean you need to forego regenerative aspects.
Okay.
You don't need to compromise the integrity, the durability, the shelf life of your design. Beauty doesn't have to mean waste. Beauty doesn't have to mean a lack of quality. You can achieve high performance and high design in tandem. And that really spoke to me at the time, particularly doing a lot of media outreach and promotional and communications work for projects that were noteworthy as commercial enterprises, but not always examples of high design in practice, not always examples of responsible design. And Lance came in like a whirlwind, and I was immediately drawn to him, to his knowledge, to what he proffered, what he was really trying to achieve and build within that firm. And within a day of knowing him, I want to be in that room.
You were all in.
I was all in, and it really stuck with me. And unfortunately, the world lost a green building movement champion. Lance passed away, I believe, in 2021. And I had not worked with him in years, but but I do recall when I started writing again and started becoming more active on social channels and say, okay, this is, in sort of in COVID. And then Lance and I briefly reconnected on, LinkedIn or commenting on each other's posts. And one of the last things I remember was, I posted an article, kind of my attempt at high-minded high-minded design theory, writing about isms. And he provided the links like, I wrote a similar article about this for this publication back in 2016 or 2014, whatever it was. And, we were sort of having a very brief exchange of ideas in the comments section of a post on LinkedIn. Nothing too impactful, but to my way of thinking, it was like, oh, wow, I'm, having this little moment of reconnecting with Lance, and it was very profound.
Wow, that's a great story there. You've mentioned a couple of key terms I want to build on here. One is regeneration, which is not status quo for architecture. How did you find your way into that vanguard, that leading edge of the built environment, more than just business as usual?
I think it was, maybe I'm riffing here, but I think it was a desire to not move beyond the term sustainability, but in some way define it better. Because sustainability had become lingua franca. It was a word that was passed around so often that it started to lose all meaning. And it was a buzzword that, with positive connotations, sustainable equals good. But what are we really talking about here? What makes it sustainable? And there was, and I just thought of something. It was an engineer friend of mine when I posted something on I think it was a Facebook post on behalf of my employer at the time, and I was basically cutting and pasting a lot of the marketing language for that project and putting it in my own personal Facebook post, and said something sustainable about it. I won't name the project, but then my engineer colleague put in the comments, he goes, how the hell is that sustainable? And it stopped me in my tracks, and I thought, yes, wait a minute, how is it sustainable? What is self-sustaining about this project? How is it regenerative? How is it restorative? What net positive is it bringing to its place, to its community, to its site, to its surrounding ecosystem, such as it is? And it was a very urban project, a concrete jungle type of project. And his question was spot on, because he was calling me out on my BS. No, this isn't what you say it is, Eric. You're absolutely right. So I carried that with me, that small experience with me, and I reflected on the fact that sustainability had started to lose all meaning, because we weren't lending credence to the word. We weren't bothering to try to dig deeper and define what made this project or that project sustainable. The word became inadequate. And as consequently, regenerative design has become the new lingua franca. It has become the new buzzword, not as a replacement of sustainability. I think most people in this, or all people in this community, understand the distinction between sustainable design and regenerative design. But now we still need to keep digging deeper into the word and its meaning, and also provide actual reliable data that supports the claims we're making about these buildings. If it is regenerative, if it is restorative, okay, how? What is it doing? It's like saying, if you're part of this community and saying, the way many firms will position themselves and brand themselves and always lead with, we believe. Nope, I don't care. Don't tell me what you believe, tell me what you're doing. Define yourself by the actions that you are taking, that you have taken, that you will take, rather than just telling me what your philosophy is.
I like this.
Because you're not telling me who you are or what you do. You're just telling me what you think. We are not defined by our thoughts, we are defined by our actions. And that's where my desire stems from, of wanting to go deeper into the word, into the term, into the meaning of, if it's sustainable, great. Let's explore all the reasons why. Let's look at its impacts. Let's look at its pros and its cons. And if it is having a net positive effect in one facet of its design, of its program, is that having an adverse effect on another feature? If this product is low carbon, low impact, is it having an adverse impact on its water consumption or its resource management in some other part of its design? It's never a straight line, and there's rarely any such thing as a universal good, as a universal positive. There's always going to be trade-offs.
Oh, that's a good point. I want to explore another key term that you've mentioned here, is beauty. Not often, well, sometimes you do hear of beauty in the architecture and built environment. We've certainly been including beauty along the way, but not all buildings are beautiful. No. I'm curious to unpack beauty a little more and how that fits into your work as a journalist.
I believe beauty is subjective. Having come up through the art world and writing a lot about art history, I believe in, if you're familiar with the art critic Robert Hughes, wrote a very, very famous book, The Shock of the New. And it was this idea that how we define beauty, how we understand beauty. I'm probably not doing Hughes justice in paraphrasing the premise of the book, but the idea that we gradually accept what is defined as beautiful over time. The first time we see something, the first time, I hate to use Picasso as an example because it's such but the first time the world gazed on a Picasso painting.
Sure. Or work of art at this high level.
Yeah. But the shock of the new is often ugly.
Okay,
It's considered ugly.
Draws opinions.
Yes, we are currently a few blocks from the Portland building, which still to this day is considered by many design enthusiasts as an ugly building. But, in many respects, it is also an elegantly designed work of symmetry. And so to use a cliche, it's in the eye of the beholder. But I do believe that, and the HMTX Industries headquarters building, I think is a good example of this as it relates to the green building movement. And I'm paraphrasing Jason McLennan here, founder of the Living Building Challenge and the designer of that building was he wanted to design a building. He says this is a Bauhaus inspired by combining elegance of form and function, and taking a nod from that school of thought, and say we wanted to design an elegant passive structure, a exercise in modern design, clean lines, elegant massing. We didn't want to make a green building that, for better or for worse, looked like a green building, that looked like something that was woodsy or overly organic. It is a modern or modernist, if you will, structure encased in a forested oblong block in an urban context. It is a wonderful convergence of all these different design elements and ecological elements, but it is not, quote unquote, maybe a green building or green looking building.
Right.
You
can't see it from the outside.
Yeah.
It's high performing, but
Yeah.
it may not be evident.
But it is objectively a beautiful building. But again, I feel that all notions of beauty are subjective. So it's really hard to pinpoint that. And that's why I think I mentioned in a previous conversation that when I began writing, I never wanted to establish myself as an architecture critic. That is not what I traffic in, and there are many writers who I respect far too much to try to ride their coattails and say, I'm also going to assign this moniker to myself. No, that's not my training, and I don't feel it's my calling.
You've mentioned one of my favorite aspects of the HMTX buildings is the nature that can literally flow underneath it, and that it's undisturbed, if you will. Give me some examples of how place is important in the site of these buildings, in the performance of these buildings, and even in the intro to this episode, the importance of the story in that ground that's there. Tell me a little more about the site of the HMTX building.
The site is an oblong piece of forest that is wedged between a bunch of commercial office buildings and multifamily apartment buildings, and on the other side, a stretch of state highway. The site itself is a hilltop of solid granite surrounded by mid-second growth forest, some very tall trees. HMTX had one or two of their divisions. They had existing office buildings on the property, and this densely forested hilltop, consumed by overgrowth, consumed by invasive species, by some industrial detritus from previous structures. It was not a hospitable site by any stretch of the imagination. It is definitely not a parcel of land that most people would close their eyes and imagine a building sitting on. If they did, invariably it would involve clear cutting and blasting the rock and leveling it off, and then building on that and destroying the ecosystem and the habitats in and around it. Site plays an important role in this building because the opposite approach was taken, saying we are not going to disturb the rock. We are going to fell as few trees as possible. We are not going to clear cut. We are going to and also put this building on the site, but in that process, leverage its natural assets and also use the building as a restorative element.
Repair the landscape.
Because there are habitats, but also it was consumed by a lot of invasive species. As Juan Ravallo of Perkins and Will, he was a senior ecologist and consultant on the project, and a colleague of Jason McLennan's. To paraphrase something he said to me in a conversation in an interview, he said, leaving nature to its devices is not always a good thing. Sometimes you need to harness it a little bit. Sometimes you need to guide its hands. You need to direct it.
Guide its hands, I like that.
Yeah, really be able to bring it back to a restorative state. And the building, it's almost ironic how a piece of development, a piece of the built environment can play a restorative role in the forest ecology of a site. And that's what it does in many respects. And the building is surrounded by, the building itself has only been open for, I believe, 2.5, maybe going on 3 years. But the building literally rubs, not literally, but it rubs elbows with some very tall trees that when you're standing on the second or third floor of this building, if you could stick your hand out the window, you could touch some oak trees right up against. So, and these aren't newly planted trees, they were existing. So to construct a 24,000 square foot linear 3-4 story building on this site and do it in a restorative way and do it in a way that really takes care not to disturb the environment as much as possible, and also play a restorative role is quite the design achievement. And a story worth telling, hence why they wanted to write the book in the first place.
Well, and speaking of books, let's talk about your second book around the Stanley Center for Peace and Security, but a similar line
That was my first book.
Oh, my apologies,
yeah.
apologies. The other book.
The other book, yes.
I'd like to ask a similar question there about its site. Tell me about some of the stories around that site of that building. And even the building itself, it was existing before, if I remember right.
Yes, it was. So the site itself had been occupied by, the building, it's an adaptive reuse project.
Okay.
So the building that the
Define that for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it's an existing library.
Okay.
Or an existing library building that...
Like a public library?
It was a public library in, the town is Muscatine, Iowa.
Okay.
Which is on the Mississippi south, or just downriver from the Quad Cities. A quick geography lesson, because it's a fascinating town with a wonderful, rich history that no one has ever heard of. Frankly, up until a few years ago, I had never heard of.
Okay.
Where is Muscatine? And I had a neighbor at the time who was from Iowa, and I mentioned Muscatine, and he stared with me. He gave me this blank stare. I'm like, aren't you from Iowa?
Don't you know these things?
Okay. But sorry, I lost track of the question.
No, we were just talking about the site, adaptive reuse, what it was,
adaptive reuse.
Where it started.
So the public library had not been a functioning library for, I believe, a couple years at that point. So the Stanley Center for Peace and Security, which is a philanthropic global organization that's been in existence in Muscatine since 1956.
Oh, wow.
And they operated out of various spaces, but never had a highly visible headquarters.
Okay.
And they were undergoing some, organizational changes and some rebranding, and really wanting to have a greater visible presence in their community. And so they looked at several options for new builds and looked at different sites in and around town, and working with Newman Monson Architects, an Iowa-based design firm, and this was their first living building project. And they settled on, I don't want to say settled, because it really was a golden opportunity to
They selected.
Yes, to make lemonade out of lemons. Because in my opinion, back to the topic of beauty, this building was a lemon. It kind of, I would joke that this building was more brutal than brutalist. An old 2-story concrete block.
Okay.
That did not receive a lot of natural light, was nothing great to look at.
Particularly attractive.
No, it just gave abandoned parking garage vibes.
Okay. Didn't quite fit into the surrounding buildings.
No, not really. Yes, and but had old, concrete Soviet surplus vibes. But they went about completely renovating this building and using the, existing structure as their shell and creating a breathtaking building within and around it.
Okay.
Ended up cutting out a large portion of the back where the library storage was and creating this enclosed urban agriculture program in the back. They have green walls on the inside that grow lettuces. They maintain, and a lot of their urban agriculture program, a lot of the foods that they grow in the back, they have a working relationship with a neighboring food bank that's just next door, and they'll donate a lot of herbs and lettuces and other things. And this organization makes their home in this building, their home base in Muscatine, Iowa. But
wow.
They're traveling all over the world. This organization has deep ties with the United Nations when the UN was in its nascent stages in the 1950s, and they've been almost had like a Forrest Gump-like presence where they've had their hand in so many. Well, they just been traveling the world and having outsized impacts.
Gotcha.
They're devoted to organizationally devoted to nuclear disarmament, raising awareness and trying to end world atrocities, wage climate action. They were at COP in Paris that resulted COP 21, I believe, that resulted in the Paris Agreement in 2015. They were there, and they committed organizational action in the wake of that conference in Paris. And I think they would agree with me if they were here. In many respects, that put them on the path of wanting to have a living building as their corporate headquarters. But the place itself, the site itself, it was an old library, and there was an older library, a 1901 library that existed on that site that was decommissioned and torn down, and then there was, so various different builds and teardowns that happened on that site. But I believe the place story for the Stanley Center is broader than that. It really concerns the town of Muscatine itself.
Okay.
When I began the research phase for that book, I did what anyone else would do. I Wikipedia'd Muscatine, Iowa.
Let's find this on the
Let's
map.
find.
Dear Google, please find.
Yeah, give me a little background on Wikipedia. But I don't know how else to explain it, but I fell in love immediately.
Okay.
And I was like, what is
You felt the feeling.
I felt the feeling from Muscatine, Iowa. And I thought, what is this fascinating little town? What is this? What's going on here? Why is this organization based here? What is it about Muscatine that has had such an impact on you? It is an epicenter of industry,
Okay.
of civil rights,
Ooh.
of engineering and modernizing and electrifying the American West and the Midwest into the West. There's so much that happened in this little town on the Mississippi. And just to list off a few examples, the home of Alexander Clark, who was a pivotal civil rights figure in the mid-19th century and late 19th century. It was the pearl button capital of the world.
The on your shirt.
Yes. Pearl
Button capital of the world.
Yeah.
That's claim to fame.
It was the pearl button capital for a while there, and there's still a pearl button museum
There, like a manufacturing.
It was a manufacturing base.
Okay.
And I forget the exact figure, but it was at one point 1/3 of all the world's pearl buttons were made in Muscatine, Iowa, and were manufactured there because of these freshwater mollusk shells that they would harvest
interesting.
out of the Mississippi along the very unique, because the Mississippi banks and turns in a unique way when it hits Muscatine, and the water slows a little bit.
Okay.
So I think this provided the right conditions.
Just the right conditions.
For the gathering of these freshwater mollusks and to achieve that right hue of pearlescence that button makers at the time were really looking for. And it was a German button maker who actually, because of tariffs at the time, relevant topic, on buttons going to and from Germany into the U.S. And he decided, well, I'm just going to go to the U.S. And there's many tall tales that are associated with the history of the pearl button industry in Muscatine. And I forget his name exactly, but he was instrumental in sort of really setting that industry off and centering there. But and there's many other aspects in historical anecdotes and aspects of the town that I'm missing on that I'm not mentioning now. But it was this small Iowa town on the Mississippi River of about 20,000 people that just had such a rich history that most small towns of 20,000 people don't have in this country. And that was a very compelling story, and I believe also contributes to why the Stanley Center, over its 70-plus year history, has remained in this town and maintained and grown such deep roots in its community.
Well, you're painting a picture for me of the vibrancy of that community, just how much uniqueness there is, there's some entrepreneurship in here, there's travel, there's trade, etc. But I can see some of this start to espouse into this regeneration of their site. You've mentioned even literally cutting out portions of the building to let the sunlight in and to literally grow food for their building and for their neighbors. I'm curious to know about What you see through your lens, you told me beauty is subjective, but you've gotten to see this building firsthand, I would imagine.
Yes.
And tell me about what your experience is walking through this building. Did you see it before it had been renovated, or did you only see it during construction? Where did you enter into the process?
I saw it post-renovation. They were putting the finishing touches. They had yet to have their grand opening, so it was in February, March of 23. I was there. They had their grand opening in June of that year, and they were still taking some packaging off of the furniture in the main atrium area, still fitting out a few of the offices for staff. Not all of the artwork was hung on the walls yet, but for all intents and purposes, the building was complete. It was occupied. People were coming into work.
Okay.
And the courtyard where they were planting the gardens, there was, it was still just, empty plats of soil. They hadn't planted anything, or if they had, nothing had really germinated.
Right.
It was still late winter, but I saw it in its complete state. And there's 4 Benjamina ficus trees that are planted inside the building that ascend upward to these grand skylights. There's plantings. There's a real many biophilic design elements, restorative elements that really support a program of wellness. Or, embody these incentives. The building itself and its design is a living, breathing incentive to come into the office every day. It's something that you walk into and someone will automatically say, I want to work in a building like this. I want the privilege to come into this building every day, to do my work, to collaborate with colleagues, because it's more than just a building that's being flooded with natural light and with offices that have outdoor views and green walls and trees planted in the lobby and wonderful biophilic elements and natural tones, reclaimed wood, a kitchen backsplash made of it's a mosaic of pearl button blanks.
Oh, wow. From the community.
From the community, I think that they sourced from the museum.
Oh.
Because you would have these little punch holes, bits of the shells that were punched out, but they hadn't been pressed into buttons yet, so they called them blanks.
Oh, I bet that's beautiful.
It is quite beautiful, and everything about the building is beautiful, but it goes beyond that, because the beauty of the building is not skin deep. The beauty is in support of a design program that is meant to foster collaboration and communication among the employees, because all of the 25 or 30 or so employees of the Stanley Center, it's a rather large building for an organization of just 25 people, and they acknowledge that. And everyone has an individual office, all on the second floor that wraps around like a U, because the building became a block and now it's a U shape.
Okay, wrapped around
the cutout. But even with everyone having their individual offices, Newman Monson, the design architects and their various sub-consultants and partners on the project wanted to create a layout and a design program that encouraged people to mill about and not take lunch in their office and not
start to mingle and mix.
Yeah, and not look for those A to B pathways that would allow someone to avoid all human interaction, whether it's going to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee or to step outside into the courtyard to get a breath of fresh air, although there's plenty of the indoor air quality in that building is also restorative, and it's wonderful just to be in there. But still, to take a walk outside, to go to the kitchen, to walk from your office to a colleague's office, or, they wanted that element of like, look, this is more than a corporate headquarters or a nonprofit headquarters. This is we're designing a building that is nurturing a community of colleagues and where collaboration and interaction is key, but also because of the sensitive nature of the organization's work, having private offices was also a necessity to maintain that sense of privacy. It's not an organization that is going to do well with an open office plan where you can overhear all of your colleagues' conversations.
Tell me about that journey through the building. You've mentioned that there isn't a direct A to B route, that you're almost channeled into connecting with your colleagues. Is that true?
Yes. So wherever offices are located, there's little living room pockets that are situated around. So it's not, the offices themselves are not isolated or sequestered from a community center. In fact, there's the main atrium on the ground floor. It's not a corporate office. There's one of the designers there. It's not a traditional office building where you would walk in and be greeted by a front desk and a receptionist and be told, oh, I'm going to room 102. You're walking into a living room.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's a long conference table, but there's a living room setting with various couches, cafe seating,
Landing space.
so different rooms in a large open atrium space. And you're also surrounded by nature within this building. You're surrounded by these trees. You're surrounded by plantings. You're surrounded by green walls and walls of lettuce that are actively growing, and surrounded by beautiful works of art, surrounded by natural light. It is a restorative environment to walk into. But also when you ascend up the stairs, there are smaller living room pockets that have been set up outside the offices. So there's always those opportunities for organic run-ins, interactions, unplanned meetings that when I came up in the design world and started working with design firms, that was always the importance of those things was always conveyed to me, particularly when it came to corporate office settings, commercial buildings, and learned it firsthand working in other office spaces. The importance of unplanned meetings, the importance of run-ins, the importance of just getting away from your desk and milling around with no agenda, and just seeing what happens. And often nothing happens. You walk from one end of the building to the other, and you sit back at your desk and go, well, I stretched my legs. Nothing happened. I didn't run into anyone. Didn't have impromptu meetings or a brainstorming session, but at least I got a little exercise and now back to work. But other times you get up off your desk and go for a walk, and you'll have a chance run in. And when that idea is baked into a design philosophy, then I think really great things can happen.
Wow.
It certainly seems to be baked into the design of the Stanley Center building in Muscatine.
Bit of switch up in our topics here, but I'd like to help me understand the role of intersectionality into these kinds of places.
If you could rephrase the question, the role of intersectionality in these buildings, or?
Yeah, tell me about how intersectionality plays into this work to create these kinds of places.
Okay, living building in particular? Okay.
Well, particularly these two, but living buildings in general could be applied here.
Well, I mean, a bit of a plug for the Living Building Challenge, because it is a standard that I think resonates with a lot of people in the design community more than other standards, with due respect to LEED and Passive House and WELL and other standards. But I believe, with due credit to Jason McLennan, who wrote the Living Building Challenge and the standard, it considers the interoperability of all those different design elements. And it's not a mistake that the performance standards, they're called performance petals, like the petals of a flower. And so when you have the petals serve a very specific purpose on a flower. They're there to capture water, to capture sunshine, to feed the organism.
Okay, yeah.
And it is a living, breathing thing. And when you have when the petals are fused, you have a stronger, more resilient organism. And the 7 performance petals of the Living Building Standard: water, energy, equity, place, health and happiness. These things are all interconnected. They're interoperable. They rely on one another. And which isn't to say that if you don't have one, the building suffers or the program suffers. In the case of HMTX, it is a pedal certified building, not a full living building, because it forgoes the water pedal.
Okay.
But forgoing the water pedal was not an accident. It was very much intentional, because there is no naturally occurring body of water on this hilltop. So to make any attempt to introduce or try to achieve the water pedal for this building would have actually required interventions that would have had an adverse impact, that would have been the opposite of restorative for the site. Would have required blasting significantly to create the storage and the treatment infrastructure to capture all of that precipitation and treat it properly. It didn't make sense. There are restorative elements too. There is a cistern on the site. It does capture every drop of precipitation that falls on the site is either channeled into the cistern for storage and rechanneled for gray water and plumbing uses, or it is channeled back into rain gardens, which restore the water table.
Oh, okay.
So many of those elements are considered. It just doesn't check off every box on the water pedal, because it did not make sense for this building on this site.
Gotcha.
In that context.
Yep.
So that becomes a compelling story in its own right. But what I love about the Living Building Challenge is that it's not only design, it's not only considering renewable energy, it's not only considering net positive water or the mechanics of the building or the material health that goes in, but it's also considering the well-being of the people who occupy this building, of having civilized environments, restorative elements, health and happiness, equity. These are core petals. They carry as much weight as energy and water and material. That speaks volumes.
Say that again. I think that that's a critical statement there. Tell me about these petals one more time, if you would.
Equity, health and happiness.
Beauty being included in, right? And if I'm going to fill in some of the blanks here, there's the site there, the place,
Yes.
energy and water, the health and happiness that you've mentioned. But the equity and beauty is something that's unique to this program, correct?
Yes. And you will find elements of that. You will find standards or points or or different checklists in other standards where equity is certainly a consideration, where health and happiness or occupant well-being are certainly considerations, indoor air quality and so forth. So these are not overlooked altogether by the leads of the world or the well buildings. Certainly not by well, but by giving them equal weight to energy and materials and water and other design aspects. It really speaks volumes to say this building, whatever the building is, should not only produce all of the electricity that it needs or capture all of the water it needs.
Gotcha.
But this building should also have restorative qualities for its community, for its home, for the people who live around the building, the people who make up the community where this building lives, the people who come to work in this building every day or live in this building every day, and it should give back in some measure, not in any small measure, but in a significant measure, one that is very quantifiable, that is very impactful, and it should do so in a way that doesn't feel superficial.
Gotcha.
We should be able to measure it. It should be tangible. We should be able to touch it, quantify it, and put it on the same pedestal with equal height of material health, of energy and water conservation, and so forth.
Wow, amazing. This is amazing. This is quite an experience you've had.
It's a privilege to write these books.
Right?
It is, yes.
Thank you for sharing this. Hey, before we transition to our next segment, you've told me about the power of storytelling in this work and even in your personal journey here. You've given us examples of two really high-performing buildings that are both serving their occupants, but to visitors and for so many people to be able to enjoy these spaces. You're given examples of how it's really benefiting the occupants of those buildings, not only in the performance of their work and duties, but also in how these buildings are treating those occupants and how those occupants interact with that space and even with each other there. You've given some really solid examples of how beauty plays a large part in the enjoyment and satisfaction of these spaces. Any other thoughts before we move on to our next segment?
I would only say that we are now living in a time where, and this is hardly universal, but more companies, more corporations have already shifted or are in the process of shifting back to requiring on-site work for their employees. I'm not here to cast aspersions on one business or the other to say, no, you shouldn't do that or you should maintain this. I'm a large advocate of remote work. I live in a sparsely populated corner of the country. I live in Maine. I rely on remote work. But that aside, if corporations, companies, nonprofits, whoever are going to make that call, and they're within their legal right to make that. They need to consider the broader impacts of their choices and the well-being of their employees and consequently the well-being of their business. And if they're going to try to do that with, better snacks or pulling out the carpet and doing an interior renovation, they need to be considering a bigger picture because all of those elements of having a restorative, beautiful environment in which to come into work that encourages those interactions, that encourages a level of productivity through its design. Those are important considerations, I believe, because if you're going to, and regardless of whether a company is going to make that call, but if you're maintaining a corporate headquarters, then you need not pursue the Living Building Challenge. or you don't have to go the extra mile so you can put a LEED Gold or LEED Platinum plaque outside your building. These are not requirements, but there needs to be greater consideration paid to the impacts that your environment is having on the people you rely on to keep your business running.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. This is amazing conversation so far. So I want to take us in a bit of a different direction here and invite you to the community garden portion of our conversation.
Okay.
Have you ever done the rose, thorn, bud framework before?
I have not.
Well, a quick primer here. A rose is something going on in your world, either presently or in the recent past, that's blossomed for you, turned into something amazing. A thorn is a prickly problem that you may be challenged with, and the bud is hope for the future. So tell me, what's growing in your garden these days? What's blossoming for you?
Does this need to be of a professional nature?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It could be related to your life, your work, your passions,
Well, I meant
your Little League coaching.
It is. I'll hop on the ladder there. It does concern my Little League coaching, not specifically the Little League, but my oldest of two kids, my son, who's 7 years old, and it's his first year in Little League, and I am the Little League coach. It is his first year Little League. It is my first year as a Little League coach. We are both very green, but coming around. Actually, I'm going to be flying home tomorrow rather late, grab about 5 hours of sleep, and then we have a game Saturday morning back home. But what's growing in the garden is, and I think anyone who has a child who goes from kindergarten, first, second grade, is you really start to see your child's personality begin to blossom.
And the interaction with peers and friends and how they handle conflict and resolution.
Really finding their independence,
finding
their voice, finding their personality, and gaining a greater understanding of their self-worth.
Sure.
And also becoming rather self-conscious,
right,
in the process.
Or self-aware.
So it's quite, watching your child enter that transitional phase is fascinating. Coupled with being his Little League coach at the same time, and really trying to find that balance between dad mode and coach mode.
Okay, yeah.
And even my dad, my son's grandfather, asked me, he asked him a few days ago, "What do you call him when you're practicing?" He goes, "Dad." Like, you don't call him coach? And my dad sort of gave me the side eye. Maybe he should call you a coach. I'm like, I'm just trying to hold it all together.
Do what you can.
Definitely something that's growing in my garden.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing. Any problems that you're challenged with?
I'll pivot to back to my professional life. And one of the challenges, and this is just a general challenge of growing my business, and it's something that I try to do, and I believe it's a good kind of problem, not something that really keeps me up at night in a bad way. But in addition to being an independent working journalist and writing for several publications and working with Ecotone to write these books and other materials. You mentioned in the introduction, content strategist. So another side of my business is working with design firms, manufacturers, engineers, other people in this space, not just generally in the built environment space, to assist them in their content strategy. And the challenge, by that I mean, this could be finding opportunities to publish thought leadership.
Yep.
Articles, editorial in support of their brand identity, helping them hone their brand identity. It could be with article placements with other magazines, self-publishing opportunities, web copy, newsletters. You run the gamut in terms of what content can be created and what use it can be put to. It is an ongoing challenge in identifying those firms and really working with them to find the gaps in their practice and convincing them that, and I say this without ego, I believe I am offering and providing an essential service, because
Definitely.
I believe a great content strategy is instrumental in having a viable business development strategy.
Absolutely.
When I came up through marketing and communications, people would often silo BD and marketing and go, "No, these are two different departments." But do you not see the interconnectedness of these things? Good marketing, good BD. Those do not exist independent of one another. And when I've been an advocate for self-publishing and really designers and manufacturers taking greater ownership of their own voice rather than relying strictly on going from one editor to the next and one magazine to the next saying, please write about our project.
Right.
Please write about this design principal who's doing great things in XYZ. But instead, and saying that, that has a place. Media outreach has a place. And you want third-party publications to be telling your story because that lends legitimacy to what you're doing in the eyes of your colleagues and peers in the larger design community. But there's also growing importance in taking ownership of your own voice. But there's a right way to do that and a wrong way to do that. And I know I've identified the avenues for the right way to do that. And there are many, there is no silver bullet. There is no panacea. There are many ways to do it right. But identifying and working with firms and convincing them or helping them identify those gaps and say, let's develop a plan. It's a big ask. It's a big get. It's like hunting for white whales, one after the other. And I work with some great clients and have over the last 3 or 4 years. It's a side of the business that I just want to grow. And it's a constant grind. It's a constant hustle. But that's where I would very much like to have a 50-50 split between my journalist work and the consulting work.
Yeah.
And right now the ratio is not quite 1-to-1. It's more 1-to-5.
But I understand the importance there. And I think that it's worth reiterating that a good business development strategy and a good marketing strategy have to go hand in hand together to really be effective.
I believe you need to communicate your design expertise with more than pretty pictures.
Yep. Justin, tell me what's bringing you hope for the future.
So we live in interesting times. Strange days have found us again, and there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of cynicism going on, many of it justified. And I really hate to see so much of the progress that's been made over the last 5 to 30 years, whatever lens you're looking through, be dismantled with an administrative hacksaw. It's really disheartening. So it's hard to find hope in that context. But Living Future, a conference like this, a gathering of these individuals, these experts, these thought leaders, is encouraging in its own right because it reinforces the importance of private enterprise really taking outsized action and saying we can't, at least for the time being, rely on the state or the federal government anymore. We need to be doing it, we need to be leaning on each other a lot more. And this is an industry built on design luminaries standing on the shoulders of other giants and their forebears. And I certainly do that with other writers and thought leaders and people who've come before me. And, none of us are building anything alone. None of us are achieving anything alone. So that need to really lean into community and find solidarity and find those opportunities for collective action, collective disruption, and good protest is something that gives me hope, that gives me a sense of cautious optimism. But I'm also still encouraged, and this kind of goes back to my work, even when we were in the middle of the Inflation Reduction Act and we were having a funding bonanza and billions of dollars were going out to fund startups and the construction of renewable infrastructure and new wind farms and new solar farms and energy parks and so forth, I always wanted to seek out stories that were happening in Red America. Where are the companies, where are the climate startups being built in Red America? Where is the renewable energy infrastructure being built in Red America? Where are the jobs and the manufacturing renaissance? Where is this happening in places that aren't California or Massachusetts or New York, Illinois? And they're compelling stories worth telling with greater, I don't want to assign greater worth to them, but stories that absolutely need to be told because they're not telling these stories through a partisan lens. They're telling them as communicating universal truths or the universal importance of this type of action, of these types of businesses, the need to get off fossil fuels, the need to build more regional supply chains of these biomaterials, of creating regional economies for mass timber, of finding innovative solutions for low carbon building materials, recycling more steel, creating low carbon concrete. We need to continue to build. We need to build. The answer is, everyone loves to say the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. Yes, but we need to build a lot more. We absolutely need to. But we need to do that in a way that is not destroying the environment around us, that is not emitting more than we can't control in the long term. So got to find a way to produce, but also not
Yeah, I get
to.
that. So, to continue down this metaphor of the garden, tell me about the gardeners of your life, your career, your personal life. Who have been your mentors along the way?
Well, certainly my father, and I give him a lot of credit for just lending me wisdom and prudence and patience along the way, and and always being both my parents certainly, but just having. Like most sons, they're going to look to their fathers for that reassurance. Every son wants their father to be proud of them. Professionally, I mentioned Lance Hosey earlier. Even though my interactions with him in the grand scheme were rather brief, had a profound impact on me. Two, I mentioned one of the professors I had in grad school, Jed Pearl, the art critic. I also, another professor of mine in passing was the late Christopher Hitchens. I took one of his courses and had the privilege to have several ornery interactions with him. The pundit that he was, the genius that he was, I do not use that word lightly, but he was that. As it concerned, just being here, being set on the path to write these books, I attribute that to Kira Gould, Lance's co-author and an active communications professional and a great writer working in the industry, a highly visible public figure in it, and she's actually meeting her in real life for the first time at this conference.
Yes, here.
Many interactions on LinkedIn and Zoom conferences and emails, but she's been a champion of my writing for the last few years and initially recommended me to Living Future and Mike Beresford, the editor and publisher of these books. Mike made it known a few years ago that he was looking for a new writer to take on some projects, and Kira passed my name along, and so she's been a champion, and I greatly appreciate the role that she has played in my professional life of late, this latest iteration of my professional life. And I could go on, going back to other versions, previous lives of my career when I was an educator or making an attempt to come up through the design and art world in New York in my 30s. But I will digress and leave the list at that.
You've mentioned you're coaching the Little League, but I'm curious to ask, who are you helping to grow? Your sons?
Other than my kids, I believe my family. We settled in Maine 2 years ago. It's a homecoming of sorts for me. I've lived there before, but when my wife and I started our family several years ago, 7-year-old son, we were living in New York, and we started to get a little restless and ended up moving to Minnesota and lived there for 4.5 years and arrived there a year before COVID. And obviously the grand disruptor that COVID was upended our lives and our ongoing attempts at the time to build community in a part of the country where we had no roots, no friendships, no family, and it's very hard to do. To say nothing of a global pandemic sticking a wrench in that. So we didn't have a pre-existing bubble to lean on. We just had a lot of Zoom calls with family and friends, and it was second, third, fourth birthdays were all conducted over Zoom.
Oh.
It was very disruptive, and it was hard. And then we had our daughter, our COVID baby, born in 22, and
my apologies. I said sons, but you've got...
Yes, yeah. And we decided that as much as disruptive as COVID was, and as tragic as it was, it need not be said or elaborated on. It's sort of an unspoken truth, but it also opened the door for people to relocate and go where they wanted to be, to return to the roots, to go back to, I had conversations with others, because we're all at this conference coming from all corners of the globe and from the country. And, we went back to Maine because we wanted to be close to family, close to friends, close to a place that we felt familiar with. Before COVID, that probably would not have been possible because remote work was not the norm. And there's not a lot of industry with a national presence based in that remote part of the country that would support the kind of work that my spouse and I are doing. But now it's a different story, and hopefully will remain so over the long term. But just still in that process of relocating, setting down roots. We're done growing the family in the traditional sense of, adding more people to it, but still building community, laying down roots, and building a family in that sense.
So my last question here in our conversation is, you live in one of the country's beautiful places, but tell me about one of your favorite places in nature.
You prepped me on this question earlier, and I gave it some thoughts, and I'm going to go with my instinct. I'm going with my gut, the first thing that came to mind. And it's in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, a summer camp that I went to as a kid and later as a teenager in early 20s was a staff member at. The town is Beckett, Massachusetts. Started going there in my youth, and then I was a counselor for several years and involved in other programs. And I'm a big advocate for summer camps. I believe any kid who wants to go should have access to a summer camp, day camp, sleepaway camp, whatever it is, but just to immerse themselves in nature for 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks during the summertime, just to have that experience and to be able to really find, it sounds cheesy in a way, but really find themselves.
Right.
That is what happens. That's what those experiences nurture, is you really find yourself and you discover who you are, what you're capable of, what your limits are. And those are wonderful, rich experiences. I think it's presumptive to say every kid should go to summer camp. Not the case, but I do believe that anyone who wants to have that experience should have access to that. And it was a privilege for me to be able to go. I was raised in New England. I was raised in the New York part of Connecticut.
Okay.
Mets and Yankees country, not Red Sox country. Close. I was actually born in Norwalk Hospital, the town where HMTX is.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a bit of a home.
Right, it is.
But Camp Beckett in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. My favorite place, always have, especially every summer when it comes around. And I'm middle-aged now, but still every year like clockwork when the school year winds down. And I'm talking even before we had children. You knew school year was coming to a close, summer was approaching, and I would be filled with the best possible kind of nostalgia. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that fills your heart. And I still think about it every year, and it's one of my absolute favorite places on earth. When you asked me that question, I considered many places that I've been to that I love, but yeah, that was the first one that came to mind, so I'm going with my gut.
I love that. Justin, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I've gotten to learn more about you and your work, your passion, storytelling as such an important part of our work, and you're really giving light and life to these living buildings. And I really appreciate you just sharing your work with us. And I look forward to seeing your next opportunities to write about these living buildings as more and more become certified. I hope that there's a chance there for an opportunity to see through your lens at these amazing places. And I'm just so grateful that you joined me here in today's conversation. And I hope you'll come back again for another chat someday.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, the work continues.
Yeah,
thank you.
I appreciate that. Well, here, give me a handshake.
Yep.
For those who are listening wherever you are, please join us for another episode of Net Podsitive, and subscribe for our next episode so you can stay tuned. And thank you for joining us here. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
I fear I may have rambled on.
Don't worry. I'm happy. A couple of things. One, my mic didn't die. Two, Mike didn't yell at me for throwing my book at him.